Welcome to session 4 of the Anxiety Management course. In the previous session of the Anxiety course, we talked about automatic negative thoughts and their effects on our feelings, body, and behavior. We emphasized the importance of becoming better at recognizing our unhelpful thoughts and identifying patterns of unhelpful thinking. We then discussed ways to challenge and dispute the unhelpful thoughts using CBT techniques. At the end of the session 3, we asked you to reflect on your own unhelpful thoughts. We strongly advise the use of the thought diary, which can be very useful at helping you to become more aware of unhelpful thinking patterns. Just remember that all of the techniques we talk about in this course require a lot of practice, so don't get discouraged if they haven't worked for you so far. By now, you're probably familiar with the vicious circle of anxiety. Last week, we looked at anxious thinking. Today, we will look at things we do when we are anxious. When we are anxious, we often engage in unhelpful behaviors that can keep our anxiety going. In this session, we will discuss some of those behaviors in detail. We will talk about overactivity, underactivity, avoidance, safety behaviors, and a number of other unhelpful behaviors that can be associated with anxiety. So what is it that we do when we are anxious? Very often, when we become anxious, we become overactive. Overactivity means that we are trying to do too many things at once. A person who is overactive might find themselves talking on the phone while cooking dinner, making an online payment for the bills, and looking after children. Overactivity might also mean spending a lot of time on one activity without taking a break. Someone who is overactive in this way may be always cleaning the house or always be working overtime. On the other hand, sometimes when we feel anxious, we become underactive. We might become underactive if we stopped doing things we used to enjoy. Lack of enjoyable and meaningful activities can make us feel unmotivated, tired, and worthless. Underactivity can make our anxiety worse. At this point of our course, you might wish to stop the video and look at the worksheet 4.1, which you will find on our website. Worksheet 4.1 encourages you to look at your own activity levels. Now we will discuss a set of strategies that you could use to tackle overactivity. If you think you're overactive, it might be a good idea to make a daily list of things you would like to do that day. You could have a set time for making such a list, for example, 7 o'clock in the evening. While writing down your daily to-do list, think about how much time you need to complete each task and whether you have enough time to do all the tasks or all activities you have planned to do. If you find that you don't have enough time to do them all, try to prioritize. Perhaps you don't have to do all the tasks. Possibly some of the less urgent points can be left till another day, or maybe they don't have to be done at all. Once you decided to tackle your overactivity, you might want to remember the following tips. Each time you choose an activity that needs to be done, stick to one task at a time. You don't want to get stressed about doing too many things at once. Also, remember to have plenty rests and breaks between the tasks. Setting time aside just for you can help you recharge your batteries. It is not uncommon to be overactive one day and underactive another. When you're underactive and you stop doing things you used to enjoy, it could be helpful to introduce some enjoyment back to your life. One way to do that is to take up a new hobby or revisiting the old one. If you're looking to take up a new interest, you might want to consider painting, reading, sightseeing, bird watching, or maybe learning a new skill like knitting or skiing. When you're anxious, you might also find that speaking to people and meeting people is too much for you. Just bear in mind that when you feel anxious or low, it's more important than ever to spend some time with others. Going for a coffee or to a cinema with a friend or a relative can lift up your mood and can help you to see things from a different perspective. In session 1 and 2, we have discussed the impact exercise can have on our physical and mental well-being. Exercise can lift our mood, make us less anxious, healthier, and more confident. If you want to become more active but you don't know where to start, consider going for a brisk walk or jog or joining a gym. Importantly, evidence suggests that exercise makes people who are prone to anxiety less likely to panic. Physical symptoms associated with exercise can be similar to those experienced in panic. When we exercise, we become more comfortable with the physical symptoms we experience as we learn that such symptoms are safe. Another helpful thing you could do to become more active is getting involved in volunteering. With a number of volunteering options available locally, you're likely to find something you would be interested in. You could help out with the events in your local park or in the local animal shelter. Doing something positive for your environment or helping others can be very rewarding. Volunteering makes us feel better about ourselves and increases our confidence. If you wish to find more about volunteering options in and around Glasgow, visit www.volunteerglasgow.org or call the Volunteering Centre on 0141 226 3431. If you're considering increasing your activity, you may wish to do it in small steps. Try to increase your activity levels by a small amount every day. Think about the easiest activity from the list you would like to do and tackle that activity first. Once you choose what you want to do, decide when and where you're going to do it. You may want to write your plan down. If you decided to take up exercise and you're looking for a little bit of extra motivation, it might be helpful to find someone else who would also like to exercise a bit more. What else do we do when we are anxious? When we are anxious, we are likely to start avoiding situations we fear or escaping from the situations we find uncomfortable. Avoidance is a way of reducing our fears and anxiety instantly, and it can seem like a natural thing to do. So what are the things we avoid? We might be avoiding busy, overcrowded places like high streets or train stations. We might be avoiding speaking to other people, going out with our friends, or seeing our family. We might be avoiding facing the day and have problems with getting out of the bed in the morning. There might be other situations you avoid which are specific to you as an individual and to your circumstances. So far, we have mentioned that avoidance can reduce our anxiety. The problem with avoidance is that it works only in the short term. In the long term, avoidance does not help your anxiety. It can actually make it worse, as over time, your fear of the situation might grow, which in turn might decrease your chances of overcoming it. Also, not facing the situation will stop you from learning about how bad it actually is and how to cope with it. You might start thinking, I can't do this, or even, I will never be able to do this. Avoidance can have a negative impact on your life. For example, avoiding busy places may limit the places where you can go or things you can do. Let's have a look at Anne's example. Last week, when Anne was in a supermarket, she felt really anxious and she decided to leave before anyone would see her like that. This week, Anne needs to do her groceries again. But whenever she thinks about leaving the house, she imagines the same scenario will happen again. She can clearly see in her mind's eye getting anxious in the supermarket again. She thinks people will notice and judge her. She is convinced that she will make a fool out of herself and that she will not be able to cope with it all. She feels sick and becomes wet from the sweat. She can feel her heart beating faster and faster, and she decides she simply can't go. Perhaps her husband could go instead. If she has to go, she will consider going late at night, when it's less busy and less people are around to notice her. Now Anne decided not to go, she feels slightly less anxious, but she starts worrying about it all. Am I going mad? She thinks. Next day, she's dreading the same situation so much that she decides to stay in the house and not go anywhere. Importantly, staying in the house makes Anne's anxiety worse. She feels worse not only physically, but also her thoughts become more catastrophic. After reflecting on Anne's example, you might wish to look at the worksheet 4.2, which you will find on our website. Worksheet 4.2 encourages you to think about a list of situations you are avoiding when you feel anxious. Writing them down will help you later on in the session. The important question is, what is it we can do to tackle avoidance? First of all, we need to remember that avoidance will not pass away itself. If you want to feel better, you need to do something about it. Once you have decided you want to tackle the situation you find difficult, you can approach it using step-by-step approach. Taking small, realistic steps will help you face the problem without making you feel overwhelmed. Just remember, it is natural to experience some anxiety when facing the situations you fear. Don't expect to be anxiety-free, and don't worry too much if you become anxious when facing the situation. Facing your fears has long-term benefits. After some time, you will feel more confident and in control of your anxiety. Take a look at the graph on the screen. The graph shows you how anxious you are likely to be if you entered and then stayed in a feared situation. Your anxiety is likely to be quite high to begin with. However, you will find that if you stay in the feared situation, your anxiety will gradually lower. The second graph shows you that if you decide to face the situation again and again, your anxiety will be reducing more and more each time. You might also notice that your anxiety passes more quickly as you get used to the situation. Once you have decided to tackle the feared situation, where should you start? A technique that can be really helpful in overcoming your anxiety is called graded exposure. Exposure means facing the situation that induces anxiety or fear in you. Graded means adopting a step-by-step approach when facing the situation. Using a graded exposure technique, we want to overcome a difficulty step by step, starting from the easiest step and moving on to more difficult steps when we feel ready. Starting from the easiest step will help us to face the situations and to gain back confidence as we go along. Let's look at Sally's example. Sally is anxious about going to busy places, and she has decided to use the graded exposure technique to overcome this. Sally made a graded exposure hierarchy, which involves all the steps she decided to take, starting from the easiest one and moving on to more difficult ones. Sally has planned to go through 10 steps before reaching her goal, which is going to the city centre at a busy time. Sally's first step is standing outside the house when it's quiet. She will repeat this step several times, trying to increase the time she spends in the situation every time she practices it. She will move on to the second step once her anxiety that occurs during practicing step 1 reduces by half. Sally's next steps are walking to post box near the house, then going to a local shop at a quiet time, going to a local shop at a busier time, going to a supermarket at a quiet time, going to a supermarket when it is busier, going to a shopping centre at a quiet time, then going to a shopping centre when it's busier, going to the city centre at a quiet time, and finally going to the city centre when it is busier. At this point of our course, you might wish to look at the worksheet 4.3, which you will find on our website. Worksheet 4.3 encourages you to look at the list of situations you tend to escape or avoid that you made as part of the exercise 4.2. You might want to pick one of the situations you identified in the previous exercise and write down a list of steps you could take in order to overcome your anxiety associated with that situation. Remember to plan your steps from the easiest to the most difficult one and be as realistic as you can. When you're trying to tackle the steps from your exposure hierarchy, practice is essential. Remember to give yourself enough time to complete each step. Every time you're about to tackle a step, rate your anxiety level from 0 to 10. Then, practice spending time in the situation and try to increase the time you spend in the situation each time you practice. Once you notice your anxiety level has reduced by half, move on to the next step and repeat the process. Once you decided to tackle your anxiety using the step-by-step approach, It can be motivating to set yourself daily goals. Make the goals as specific as you can. For example, to spend 10 minutes in a quiet supermarket. If you find it difficult to stay in the situation that makes you anxious, use controlled breathing and relaxation techniques to help you get through. You might also want to use thought-challenging techniques to manage any unhelpful thoughts that might arise. Be prepared to do the same step several times and try to practice every day. Be proud of yourself for what you achieve. Facing anxiety means making a progress. After each practice session, it can be helpful to reflect on how it went. Think about what you noticed when you were trying to reach the goals you set yourself. How did you feel? What were you thinking? What did you do that helped it go well? How did you feel after you carried out your plan? Is there anything you will do differently next time? Importantly, reflecting on your practice can make your future goals easier to achieve. So far, we have talked about overactivity, underactivity, and avoidance behaviors. What else do we do when we feel anxious? When we feel anxious, we often behave in a way that makes us feel safer. Behaviors that help us to go through anxiety-provoking situations yet do not help us to gain control over our anxiety in the long term are called safety behaviors. Importantly, while safety behaviors make facing anxiety easier, they are unhelpful in overcoming it. Some examples of safety behaviors are always planning your day ahead and sticking to the plan to keep things predictable and manageable, drinking alcohol or smoking cannabis to help you get through things, always carrying water and diazepam on you in case of a panic attack, always carrying a mobile phone in case you need to call for help, always sitting in the back when attending meetings or wearing dark clothes to be less noticeable, or seeking company every time you want to leave the house, just in case something bad happens. Safety behaviors might seem helpful as they allow us to get through difficult situations. However, they only work short term. In the long run, they can become unhelpful habits and they might make you think you could not cope if you did things differently. They might also heavily affect your life. Always planning ahead and sticking to the plan does not allow you to be flexible and stops you from being spontaneous. Most importantly, safety behaviors can stop you from taking control over your anxiety. If you become dependent on your safety behaviors, think about reducing or dropping as many of them as you can. For example, next time you go to the shops, try to leave your diazepam in the house. You might also want to replace alcohol with a non-alcoholic drink next time you feel anxious and think you cannot face things without a glass of wine. You might want to consider leaving your mobile phone at home from time to time, or leaving the house without a rigid plan. If your anxiety increases when doing all those things, use controlled breathing and relaxation techniques to reduce it. Challenge your unhelpful thoughts. Try to stay calm and tell yourself that everything will be okay. At this point of our course, you might wish to look at the worksheet 4.4, which you will find on our website. Worksheet 4.4 encourages you to think about your own safety behaviors and what would happen if you decided to drop them. You might have noticed a number of other unhelpful behaviors you do when you're anxious. Other unhelpful behaviors may include getting easily irritated, snapping at people, shouting, arguing, fidgeting, pacing, talking too quickly, biting nails, picking skin, pulling hair, excessive drinking and smoking, double-checking things, constant checking if your partner or family member is safe, getting fixated on something, staring into the wall, neglecting self-care, being overly concerned with your appearance, and overeating or undereating. If you think that some of the things you do when you're anxious are unhelpful, try to follow these steps. First, try to notice what you do when you're anxious. You may want to consider writing it down. Then reflect on how helpful it is to do what you do. Then think about the thoughts you might be experiencing when you do the behavior, and if you find them unhelpful, try to challenge them. Finally, try to drop or gradually reduce the unhelpful behavior. When you do this, use controlled breathing and thought-challenging techniques, as they can help you to achieve your goal. Remember that reflection can be a very powerful tool when you want to introduce changes to your life. You might want to keep a diary in which you could write down what you have observed and experienced each day. Putting your experiences on paper can make things look much clearer and easier to tackle. It is also important that you reward yourself for your daily efforts. You might want to share your success with your friends and family. Sharing your experiences with others is likely to boost your confidence and give you some extra motivation. At the end of this session, we would like to encourage you to think about your own unhelpful behaviors and ways to tackle them. Try to make some helpful changes in your behavior. If you decided to use some of the strategies discussed in this session, you might find it helpful to watch the video again.